The sound of sizzling oil filled the cramped kitchen, a relentless hiss that clung to the air like static. It was almost midnight, and the fluorescent lights of Bugatown buzzed faintly above Ethan Cole's head, their dull glow bouncing off the metal surfaces smeared with grease. The restaurant smelled of salt, smoke, and something faintly sweet. Burnt onions maybe, or the ghost of fries cooked an hour too long. The last customers of the night were a couple of cab drivers hunched over their meals, the kind of people who never made eye contact, too tired to talk. Behind the counter, Ethan wiped his hands on his apron, feeling the coarse fabric drag across his fingers, and called out, "Order 47, double cheese, extra pickles." No one answered. They never did. He slid the bag across the counter anyway, the practiced rhythm of muscle memory guiding him. Fold, wrap, slide, smile. Always smile. It was what the manager said on his first day. People don't come here for food. They come here for the illusion that someone cares. Ethan had learned to fake that illusion well. A small smile, a warm tone, the same 3 words on repeat. Have a great day. Outside the window, neon signs from the strip mall reflected off the puddles in the parking lot. The city's light pollution painted the night sky a murky orange. Manhattan was 20 miles away, glowing like a promise he couldn't touch. His shift would end in 15 minutes, but he knew the smell of grease wouldn't leave his hair until morning. It never did. Even after 2 showers, it still clung to him like a reminder of where he was. He untied his apron slowly, letting the heat of the fryer fade from his skin. The manager, a heavy-set man with tired eyes, came out of the back room counting the cash register. "You close up tonight, kid?" "Yeah, I got it," Ethan said. "Good. Lock up tight. Some folks been snooping around the dumpsters again." "Got it, Rick." The man grunted in acknowledgement, grabbed his jacket, and left without another word. The door chimed as it shut, and Ethan was alone. He liked this part of the night, the quiet, the hum of the freezer in the corner, the faint sound of the highway outside. He could almost think here, as if the silence made space for something real. He pulled out his phone, a cracked screen, one corner held together with tape, and opened an online finance course. The screen was smudged, the battery icon red, but the words on the screen still pulled him in. Principles of venture investment. Identifying undervalued potential. He read a paragraph, then another until the words began to blur. He'd been doing this every night for months. 8-hour shifts at Bugatown, then studying until 2 in the morning. His friends from high school had gone to college or moved out of state. He'd stayed, saving money, telling himself it was temporary. He didn't belong here forever. He had plans. He closed the phone and leaned back against the counter, staring at the menu board above. Double deluxe, $5. Fries combo, $3. Kids meal, $4. All of it had become background noise. He knew every price by heart, every combination. Yet what he really memorized wasn't the food, it was the faces. The families that came in every Friday. The delivery drivers grabbing orders in a rush. The older woman who always left an exact dollar tip no matter her total. People built patterns, and Ethan had started to see them like equations, inputs, outputs, predictable habits. Fascinated him. Numbers told stories. So did people. He was studying both. When the clock hit midnight, he flipped the open sign to closed, cleaned the grill, and stepped outside. The night air was cold and sharp, cutting through the smell of grease that clung to his clothes. He pulled his jacket tighter around himself and started walking the 2 miles back to his apartment. His sneakers slapped softly against the wet pavement, each step echoing in the stillness of suburbia after hours. He passed a row of dark storefronts, pawn shop, laundromat, dollar store, all sleeping behind metal shutters. It was quiet except for the hum of a vending machine and the occasional whoosh of a car speeding by. He thought about how every one of these places probably started with a dream. Someone once believed they could make something out of nothing. Some of them succeeded. Most didn't. But the fact that they tried, that mattered to him. When he reached his apartment building, a box-shaped complex with flaking paint and broken mailboxes, he paused. In the window above the entrance, a light flickered weakly. Mrs. Ramirez, the old woman from 2B, still awake, probably watching her telenovelas again. He smiled faintly. He'd helped her carry groceries last week, and she'd given him a tamale wrapped in foil and whispered, "For luck." He climbed the stairs to the 3rd floor, keys jingling in his pocket, and unlocked the door to his studio. The air inside was stale. One bed, one desk, a tiny kitchenette. The wallpaper peeled in corners, and the fridge hummed louder than it should. He sat at the desk, opened his laptop, and stared at the code editor on his screen. A half-finished program blinked back at him. Something he'd been working on for weeks. An idea he couldn't quite name yet. A system for connecting local diners to nearby customers, cutting out the delivery fees that made food unaffordable for so many. It was messy, full of bugs, nowhere near functional. But it was his. He typed until his eyelids grew heavy, the screen glowing against the dark room. When he finally lay down on the mattress, he didn't dream of money or fame. He dreamed of lights, small ones, flickering in the distance, like the reflection of hope off a puddle. Morning came gray and cold. Ethan woke to the sound of rain tapping against the window. His alarm had gone off 20 minutes ago, but he'd been too tired to move. He rolled out of bed, brushed his teeth with the last squeeze of toothpaste, and put on his Bugatown uniform again. The name tag, Ethan, was cracked across the middle, the E fading. The bus was late as always. He stood under the awning, watching cars spray up arcs of water as they passed. Across the street, a group of college students waited for their own ride, laughing loudly. Their clothes were new, their sneakers spotless. One of them, a tall guy with a clean fade and an expensive watch, was complaining about his professor. "Man, what's the point of studying finance if you can just have money?" he said, and his friends laughed. Ethan smiled to himself. He didn't envy them, not really. He'd learned that the world never gave anything for free. And one day, he'd prove that knowledge mattered more than privilege. At the restaurant, Rick handed him a headset as soon as he walked in. "Drive-throughs acting up again. You're on window duty." "Got it?" Ethan said, slipping it over his ear. For the next 4 hours, he handed out sodas and fries through the drive-through window, rainwater dripping from the edges of the car roofs. His hands moved automatically, his mind elsewhere. Every time the register chimed, he thought about efficiency, profit margins, logistics, how much food was wasted each day, how delivery apps charged 30% commissions, how no one seemed to care because it wasn't their money. But he cared. He was taking notes quietly, studying the system from inside the grease trap. One day he'd rewrite it. Around noon, the lunch rush hit. A line of cars snaked around the building. One woman complained her fries were cold. A teenager wanted extra ketchup. A man in a suit paid with exact change, not a penny more. It was chaos. But Ethan handled it with the calm precision of someone who'd long learned to separate ego from effort. Then came the moment that would stay with him forever. The spark before the storm, though he didn't know it yet. A car rolled up to the window, sleek and black, tinted glass hiding the passengers. When it lowered, 3 college boys stared back at him. The one in the driver's seat smirked, tossing a credit card between his fingers. "Yo, burger boy, make sure the fries are hot, all right? We don't eat peasant food." Ethan nodded politely, his voice even. "Of course, sir." They laughed. He handed them the bag a minute later, the smell of fresh fries wafting out. The driver took it, looked at him up and down, then flicked a $20 bill at his chest. It fluttered down like something dirty. "Keep the change, champ." The boy sneered, and they sped off. For a moment, Ethan just stood there, the bill at his feet, rain blowing in through the open window. Then he bent down, picked it up carefully, and placed it in the tip jar. His hands didn't shake. His expression didn't change. But inside, something hardened quietly. Not anger, not bitterness, just resolve. That night, he stayed up later than usual. He rewrote part of his code, restructured the interface, built the skeleton of a network. A web of small connections, like veins of light spreading through darkness. He didn't know yet that this program would become QuickBite, the app that would make him a millionaire, then a billionaire. All he knew was that something had shifted. When he finally fell asleep at dawn, the faint smell of grease still lingered in the air, mixing with the quiet hum of possibility. The city outside was waking up. Somewhere, far above him, people were already making deals, trading futures, shaping the world. And Ethan Cole, the boy behind the counter, was about to join them, though no one, not even he, could imagine just how far he'd go. The morning light seeped through low clouds, pale and uncertain, painting the city in shades of silver. The rain had stopped sometime before dawn, leaving behind a damp quietness that clung to everything. The sidewalks, the traffic lights, the worn-out sneakers on Ethan Cole's feet. He walked fast, his breath visible in the chill air. A backpack slung over one shoulder and his laptop tucked safely inside, wrapped in a towel to keep it from the rain. The streets of downtown Newark were waking up slowly. Vendors were opening their carts, rolling up the metal shutters of corner stores, while taxis idled at red lights, their engines purring like restless animals. Ethan passed them all, his eyes half-focused, his mind running far ahead of his body. He had spent most of the night working on the program again, fixing broken lines of code, adjusting parameters, building an interface so simple that even his exhausted brain could make sense of it. Now he couldn't stop thinking about it. The bus arrived late as usual. Ethan climbed aboard, the smell of damp coats and cheap coffee filling the narrow aisle. He found a seat near the window and stared out at the skyline. Gray towers rising against a gray sky. Somewhere beyond those towers, he thought, people were pitching billion-dollar ideas, shaking hands, signing contracts. Somewhere out there was a world that didn't smell like burnt oil or disinfectant. He wanted to reach it, but not just for himself. That idea, to make something that mattered, had been gnawing at him since the first time he'd had to choose between buying groceries or paying rent. He wanted to build something that gave people like him a chance, something that said you don't have to be rich to belong here. The bus jerked to a stop, pulling him back to the present. Across the aisle, an older man in a faded trench coat was reading a newspaper. The headlines screamed about the stock market hitting record highs. Ethan smiled faintly. To him, those numbers were like constellations, patterns in the chaos, maps that told stories about human desire and fear. He pulled out his notebook, its pages covered in sketches of interfaces, scribbles of equations, arrows linking one idea to another. Local restaurants, delivery system, users, dynamic pricing. It wasn't elegant, not yet, but it could be. When the bus reached the end of the route, he stepped off into the heart of the city, an ecosystem of ambition and fatigue. The sidewalks pulsed with life. Suits walking fast, street performers juggling for loose change, delivery workers balancing boxes on bikes. Ethan weaved through them, heading toward the public library. Inside, the world changed. The noise outside faded, replaced by the soft rustle of pages and the low hum of fluorescent lights. He'd spent so many nights here that the security guard just waved him through. "Back again, huh?" "Always," Ethan said with a grin. He found his usual corner on the second floor, by the window overlooking the park, and set up his laptop. The library's Wi-Fi was slow, but it was free. He opened his code, the same lines he'd stared at for weeks, and started typing. The rhythm of the keys became a kind of heartbeat. For hours he forgot where he was. He forgot the chill outside, the ache in his legs, the noise of his life. All that existed was the logic of creation, the thrill of building something from nothing. He worked through the morning, through the quiet chatter of students and the distant sound of rain starting again. By noon, he had something that looked like a skeleton of an app. Not much, but enough to click through. When he tested it, a small box popped up on the screen. "Welcome to QuickBite, connecting people, one meal at a time." He leaned back in his chair, staring at the words. They weren't perfect, but they meant something. The name had come to him at 3 in the morning. Simple, easy to remember, honest. QuickBite wasn't about luxury or speed. It was about connection. About the diner owner who couldn't afford to list his menu on big delivery apps. About the customers who wanted affordable food without hidden fees. He thought of the $20 bill that had hit his chest the day before. He hadn't told anyone about it. Not even Rick. There had been something quietly symbolic about it. A reminder that the world divided people into servers and served, and that some believed the line between them was permanent. But Ethan didn't believe in permanent lines. That thought carried him through the day. When the library closed, he walked to a nearby diner, one of those old-fashioned ones with a flickering neon sign and chrome stools. He ordered coffee and a sandwich and took out his laptop again. The waitress, a woman in her 40s with tired eyes but a kind smile, stopped by. "You a student?" "Something like that," Ethan said. She nodded. "You look like someone who's going to be more than that soon." He laughed softly. "I hope so." She poured more coffee without asking. "You working on something?" "Yeah," he said. "An idea." "Well, don't let it go. The world's full of folks who give up right before it happens." Her words lingered. He stayed until the lights dimmed and the last customers left. When he finally walked out, the rain had stopped again, replaced by a sharp wind that cut through his thin jacket. But he didn't feel cold. His mind was on fire. He could see it now, the map of how it would all work. He'd start with a few diners, the kind that already knew him, maybe convince them to let him handle local orders through his app. He'd deliver the food himself if he had to. He'd take photos, build trust, collect data. Slowly, the system would grow. He spent the next 2 weeks balancing his job at Bugatown and his new obsession. His apartment became a workshop. Empty coffee cups piled beside the laptop. Sticky notes covered the walls. Phrases like, "Simple is fast," "Empathy scales," "Solve for value, not vanity." He coded through exhaustion, debugging lines until the sun came up. When he made a mistake, he laughed instead of cursing. Every bug was proof he was building something real. One evening, as he was locking up Bugatown, Rick approached him with a tired smile. "Kid, you ever thought about management? I could use a guy like you on the morning shift." Ethan hesitated. The offer was steady, safe. But safety wasn't what he wanted. "I appreciate it, Rick," he said softly. "But I think I've got something else I need to do." Rick shrugged. "Suit yourself. Just don't forget where you came from." "I won't," Ethan said. And he meant it. By the end of that month, he had a working prototype. It wasn't much, ugly, glitchy, half-broken, but when he tested it with one local diner, it worked. He got 3 real orders through the app that night. 3 strangers who didn't know his name but trusted his code enough to buy dinner through it. He couldn't stop smiling. He took a screenshot of every order, each one like a heartbeat on a monitor. The city outside his window glowed with distant lights, and for the first time, he felt like he belonged to that glow. But success, even the smallest kind, has a way of waking the world around it. One morning, he received an email. A local investor wanted to meet, someone who'd heard about QuickBite through a mutual contact. The message was short. "Heard you're building something interesting. Come by and show me what you've got." Ethan stared at the screen for a long time, his heart pounding. This was it. His first chance. He took the day off work, ironed his only decent shirt, and printed a few slides of his design. The meeting was in a glass building downtown, the kind of place that smelled like money and ambition. The investor, a man named Jeffries, listened politely, nodding as Ethan spoke. But when Ethan finished, Jeffries leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled. "You've got passion, I'll give you that," he said. "But you're building for the wrong market. Poor people don't make investors money." Ethan froze. "With respect, sir, that's not." Jeffries waved a hand. "Look, if you pivot to something more upscale, organic food delivery for professionals, maybe I might be interested. But this is charity, not business." Ethan left the building with his stomach in knots. The city lights outside seemed colder than before. For the first time in months, doubt crept in like fog. What if Jeffries was right? What if people didn't care about helping others unless it looked good in a press release? He walked for hours, aimless, until he found himself by the Hudson River. The water was dark, rippling softly under the wind. Across it, Manhattan glimmered like a distant galaxy. He sat on a bench and watched the ferries pass. Then he took out his notebook and wrote a single line across a fresh page. "Build for those who need it most. Let success find you later." It became his mantra. The next morning, he got up and worked harder than ever. He partnered with 3 more diners, offering to manage their local deliveries for free until profits showed. He biked through the rain, carrying bags of food to customers himself. He coded updates at midnight, fixing issues on the fly. Slowly, QuickBite began to take shape not as a product but as a movement. A few months later, he quit Bugatown. Rick shook his hand, half proud, half sad. "Go get 'em, kid," he said. "I will," Ethan replied. And he did. QuickBite spread through word of mouth. Local news picked it up. Then came a small feature in an online magazine. Startup helping local diners survive the delivery giants. Suddenly, messages flooded his inbox. Investors who'd once ignored him now wanted meetings. Jeffries called twice. Ethan never answered. Within a year, he had a small team, a rented office space, and real funding. QuickBite was no longer an idea, it was a revolution in motion. And at its center stood the same boy who once scrubbed fryers and dreamed through exhaustion. But success carries weight. Every decision became a balancing act, growth versus values, profit versus purpose. Ethan could feel the world watching, waiting for him to slip. He spent long nights staring at the ceiling, wondering if he could hold onto the heart of what he'd built. One night, as the city glittered below his apartment window, he thought about the college boys from that day. He wondered where they were now, what they were studying, whether they'd ever remember the burger boy they'd mocked. He didn't know then that fate was already stitching their paths together again, quietly, invisibly, with the precision of irony. Soon, their worlds would collide once more. Not in a greasy kitchen, but in a tower of glass and gold. And this time, the power would rest in his hands. The wind outside howled softly, as if carrying a warning. Ethan turned off his screen and whispered to himself, the same words he'd repeated since the beginning. "Never forget where you came from." Then he closed his eyes, unaware that the next chapter of his life, the one that would turn him from a dreamer into a legend, was already waiting just beyond the horizon. The boardroom smelled faintly of coffee, new carpet, and ambition. It was a sharp, expensive kind of air-filtered, chilled, artificial. Outside, Manhattan shimmered behind a wall of glass, the morning light bouncing off skyscrapers that stabbed the sky like monuments to wealth. Ethan stood before the long mahogany table, his palms damp but steady. His reflection shimmered faintly on the polished surface. The same boy who once flipped burgers, now wearing a tailored navy suit. He wasn't supposed to be here, not according to the world that had once thrown $20 bills at his chest. Yet here he was, 27 years old, founder and CEO of QuickBite, a startup that had grown from a greasy idea into a national name whispered in boardrooms and college dorms alike. The investors were still finding their seats, murmuring in low tones, their watches gleaming under the recessed lighting. They were older, richer, men who could make or break fortunes over lunch. Ethan had learned not to be intimidated by them, at least not outwardly. He adjusted his tie, nodded to his assistant, and began his presentation. A massive screen behind him lit up, QuickBite, feeding the future, one neighborhood at a time. He spoke clearly, confidently, every word measured but alive with conviction. He talked about their growth, how the app now partnered with 3,000 local restaurants in 22 states, serving millions of customers, how delivery fees were slashed, how small businesses that had once been dying were now thriving. The numbers told one story. His voice told another, one of grit, hope, and the quiet rebellion of the working class. When he finished, silence filled the room. Then came the first question. "Impressive traction," said a man in a gray suit, his accent clipped and precise. "But where's the real scalability? You're talking about saving diners, not exploiting them. Investors don't fund goodwill." Ethan met his gaze. "We don't exploit communities, we empower them. And that's our advantage. People trust us. That loyalty translates to retention and organic growth." A soft chuckle rippled from the far end of the table. A younger investor, no older than 35, leaned forward. "That's all noble, Mr. Cole, but you're not building a charity. Sentiment doesn't pay shareholders." Ethan's voice stayed calm, almost gentle. Neither does short-sighted greed. A few heads turned. The room thickened with tension. He continued, "We're not chasing profit at the expense of principle. Quick Bite is about longevity. We grow slower, but we last longer. We build something people can believe in." A pause. Then, slowly, the man in the gray suit nodded. "You sound like someone who's been hungry before." Ethan smiled faintly. Every day. There was a murmur of laughter, a flicker of respect. The tension dissolved. The deal would close later that afternoon. Another round of funding secured. Another step toward the dream that had started in a grease-stained apron. When the meeting ended, he stepped into the hallway, the glass doors hissing shut behind him. His assistant, Talia, followed, tablet in hand. "That went better than expected," she said. Ethan exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "It had to. Investors love confidence. They don't need to know your hands were shaking under the table." He smiled. "They stopped shaking when I realized I've already done the hardest part." "What's that?" "Convincing myself I belong here." They rode the elevator down, the floor numbers ticking softly past. Ethan's reflection stared back at him in the mirrored walls. The same jawline, sharper now, the same eyes, calmer but still restless. He thought of his old Bugatown uniform, folded somewhere in a box at home, and felt an ache of memory. Outside, the city was alive again. Taxis honking, steam rising from subway grates, the scent of roasted nuts from street carts. Ethan loved this chaos. It reminded him of movement, of possibility. He walked fast, Talia keeping pace beside him, their heels clicking in sync on the marble floor. "Lunch with the media team in 20 minutes, she said, checking her calendar. "And you've got the keynote speech next week at Columbia." At the mention of the university, Ethan hesitated. "Columbia? Yeah, you agreed months ago. Guest lecture on social entrepreneurship. They said the students are thrilled." He nodded slowly, the faintest smile tugging at his lips. "Columbia, huh?" He didn't tell her why the name lingered. He didn't need to. Fate had a way of arranging its own meetings, and sometimes it waited patiently until both sides were ready. That night, the city glittered through his penthouse windows, a sea of light stretching into infinity. Ethan sat alone on the balcony, a glass of whiskey untouched beside him. Below, the hum of traffic blended with the low throb of jazz from a nearby rooftop bar. The success should have felt euphoric. Instead, it felt heavy. He'd built an empire, but the higher he climbed, the lonelier the air became. The calls came in endlessly, investors, partners, journalists. Everyone wanted a piece of the story, but few cared about the truth behind it. He opened his laptop, scrolling through emails until one caught his eye. Subject: Bugatown franchise closing notice. His old store, the one he'd worked in, was shutting down. He stared at the message for a long moment, memories flooding back. The sound of sizzling oil, the sting of that $20 bill, Rick's tired voice saying, "Don't forget where you came from." He closed the laptop and sat in silence, watching the city lights blur in his vision. He hadn't forgotten. Not really. But he wondered if he was starting to drift too far from that boy who had once believed kindness could be revolutionary. A soft chime interrupted his thoughts. A message from Talia. Confirmed. Columbia keynote next Friday, 10 a.m. You're the closing speaker. He typed a reply. Got it. Let's make it memorable. The following week arrived faster than he expected. Columbia University looked like something out of a dream. Marble columns, ivy-covered walls, students moving in waves of chatter and laughter. Ethan stood at the edge of the lecture hall, watching them find their seats. Their energy was electric, restless, the kind he used to envy. He adjusted the mic, waiting for the crowd to settle. "Good morning," he began, his voice echoing softly through the room. "When I was your age, I was learning finance too. But I didn't learn the most valuable lessons in a classroom. I learned them behind a counter, wearing an apron that smelled like onions." The room rippled with laughter. He told them about his journey. Not the polished version from magazines, but the truth. The rejections, the nights he almost gave up, the greasy floors that taught him humility. He spoke about purpose, about empathy in business, about building things that outlast ego. The students leaned in, some taking notes, others simply watching him. A man who seemed both ordinary and untouchable. When the speech ended, the applause was thunderous. Ethan thanked them, smiling. But as the crowd began to disperse, a small group of students lingered near the front. 3 of them dressed sharply, carrying sleek portfolios. "Mr. Cole," one of them said, stepping forward with a confident grin. "We're honored to meet you. We're actually presenting tomorrow at your investment firm's open pitch day." Ethan nodded politely, not recognizing them. "Glad to hear it. What's your project about?" The student, tall, tan, expensive watch gleaming, replied smoothly. "A premium food delivery app for professionals. High-end clients only. We believe exclusivity drives value." Ethan's smile didn't waver, but something flickered behind his eyes. "Interesting. What did you say your name was?" "Brandon," the young man said proudly. "Brandon Hayes." The name echoed faintly in Ethan's mind. Something about the face, the tone. It tugged at a buried memory. He tilted his head, studying the boy. "Well, Brandon," he said softly, "I'll be there tomorrow. I look forward to hearing your pitch." They shook hands. Brandon's grip was firm, eager. Ethan's was calm, steady. The kind of handshake that conceals an earthquake beneath still water. When they left, Ethan stood for a moment in the emptying hall, staring at the door they'd walked through. The rain had started again outside, tapping softly against the tall windows. He whispered to himself, almost smiling, "Full circle." The next morning, the boardroom at Cole Ventures buzzed with excitement. Dozens of student teams had gathered for the annual pitch competition. Cameras flashed, coffee cups clinked. Ambition thickened the air. Talia briefed him quickly. "You'll sit with the panel of judges. Remember, they don't know who's being evaluated until the final round." Ethan nodded. "Good. Let's keep it that way." Hours passed. Apps, devices, business plans, most forgettable, some promising. Then came the final team, Brandon Hayes and his partners. They entered confidently, smiling for the cameras. Brandon began his presentation, speaking in rehearsed perfection. Their app, Gastro Elite, was designed to connect high-end clients with exclusive restaurants. "We cater to the top 1%, Brandon said, "because they deserve faster, better, and more luxurious service." The room murmured approval. It was sleek, profitable, marketable. Ethan said nothing, his expression unreadable. When they finished, he leaned forward. "Impressive," he said quietly. "But tell me, what inspired this?" Brandon grinned. "Honestly, the idea came from watching people who have no class handle food. We wanted to elevate the experience, make it cleaner." Laughter rippled from the audience. Except from Ethan. He sat perfectly still. In the silence that followed, Brandon's smile faltered slightly. "Something wrong, sir?" Ethan stood slowly, buttoning his jacket. The room seemed to tilt, the air sharpening. "You know," he said, his tone calm but cutting, "I used to work at Bugatown, behind a greasy counter. People like you laughed then too." Recognition flickered in Brandon's eyes. His face drained of color. The $20 bill, the sneer, the rain. All of it came rushing back. Ethan stepped closer, his voice still low, still gentle. "You threw money at me once. Told me to keep the change." He smiled faintly. "So here's some advice, keep the arrogance. You'll need it when the world stops laughing." The room went dead silent. The other investors shifted uncomfortably. Talia watched, wide-eyed, unsure whether to intervene. Ethan turned toward the panel. "I'm not investing in Gastro Elite. I don't fund ideas that build higher walls. I fund bridges." He walked out before anyone could respond. Outside, the rain had stopped again. The air smelled clean, new. He stood under the glass awning of the building, looking out at the city, his city, and felt something settle in his chest. Not anger, not revenge, just clarity. He took out his phone, opened his notes app, and typed a single line. "Next project, Cole Foundation. Grants for student startups focused on community impact. He smiled to himself. Let's feed the world again. Above him, the clouds began to break, sunlight spilling through like forgiveness. He walked away without looking back. The sun broke through the Manhattan skyline like a blade of gold, cutting through the last shreds of storm clouds. The streets still glistened from the morning rain, reflecting streaks of light that made everything shimmer, unreal, as if the city itself was taking a deep breath after holding it for too long. Inside a glass tower 48 floors above ground, Ethan Cole stood before a window that stretched from floor to ceiling, watching the city awaken beneath him. He should have felt triumphant. The morning papers had called him the billionaire with a conscience. Social media hailed him as the new face of ethical capitalism. Investors, journalists, and CEOs quoted his speech from yesterday's event, replaying it like scripture. I fund bridges, not walls. The phrase had gone viral overnight, yet Ethan felt no victory in it. He turned away from the window, the light falling across his suit jacket in uneven gold lines. His reflection stared back from the glass. Older than he remembered, his eyes sharper, his jaw more tired. Success aged differently when it was earned. It didn't gray your hair. It grayed your soul in quiet, invisible shades. The door behind him opened softly. Talia stepped in, holding a stack of folders, her usual composure clouded by hesitation. You've been standing there for an hour, she said gently. Press is waiting for your comment about yesterday's event. It's all over the news. Ethan smiled faintly without turning. The scene with the students? Scene is putting it lightly. Half the business world is calling it poetic justice. The other half says you humiliated them. Both are right, he murmured. Talia sighed, placing the folders on his desk. You know, you didn't have to do it that way. I know, he said softly. But I didn't plan to. It just happened. She hesitated, then asked, Do you regret it? Ethan thought for a long moment. No, I regret that it needed to happen. The room fell quiet except for the distant hum of the city. He walked to his desk, opened one of the folders, and scanned the documents inside. The words blurred after a while: projections, valuations, funding rounds. All noise. What about the new project? Talia asked. The one you mentioned yesterday, the foundation? Ethan's expression softened, the faintest flicker of life stirring behind his eyes. Yes, that's what matters now. He had spent the night sketching out its blueprint. A non-profit arm of Cole Ventures, focused on funding young entrepreneurs who wanted to build for people, not profit. He called it the Cole Foundation for Human Innovation. Its mission was simple: to give others the chance he never had, without demanding their souls in return. Find me people who still believe in what they do, Ethan said quietly. People who haven't been told yet that idealism doesn't pay rent. Talia smiled. You mean people like you used to be? He looked at her and said, almost wistfully, exactly. The following weeks moved like a river. Steady, relentless, unstoppable. News outlets shifted their gaze from gossip to admiration. Headlines praised the foundation, calling it a revolution in philanthropy. Investors followed, eager to be part of the movement. Ethan barely slept, bouncing between meetings, media interviews, and late-night strategy sessions. Yet beneath the surface, something inside him began to ache. Success had a way of drowning the silence, and in silence truth waited. One evening, long after the office had emptied, Ethan sat alone at his desk, staring at an old photo he kept tucked inside a drawer. It was from his Bugatown days. He and Rick, the manager, smiling awkwardly beside a fryer. Rick's arm was slung around his shoulder, his face lined but kind. The caption on the back, written in fading ink, read, "Never forget the grease before the glory." He wondered what had become of Rick. The thought haunted him for days until he finally decided to find out. He left the skyscraper behind one gray morning, trading his black car and driver for the subway, a choice that startled Talia when she saw him leaving. "You're taking the train?" she'd asked, incredulous. "I need to remember what it feels like," he'd replied simply. The subway air was thick with the familiar scent of metal, rubber, and people. No one recognized him here. He was just another man in a coat, another face among thousands. The train rattled through tunnels, each stop peeling back layers of his memory. When he stepped off at the old neighborhood, time seemed to contract. The streets were smaller than he remembered. The diner on the corner was gone, replaced by a vape shop. The pawn store still stood, its neon sign flickering like an old wound that refused to heal. And there it was, Bugatown, boarded up, its logo faded by rain and years. He pushed open the half-hinged door, the bell above it giving one last pitiful ring. Inside, dust motes floated through shafts of light like ghosts of grease and laughter. The counter was gone, the fryers stripped out, the smell replaced by the hollow scent of abandonment. Ethan stood there a long time, his heart heavy and quiet. He could almost hear the sizzle of oil, Rick's gravelly voice, the echo of his own younger laughter. He walked to the back corner where he used to study finance on his breaks, and sat on the cold tile floor. For a moment, he wasn't the billionaire CEO. He was just Ethan, broke, hungry, and dreaming. The sound of footsteps broke the spell. A voice called softly, "Can I help you?" He turned. A woman stood by the door, her hair streaked with gray, holding a grocery bag. She looked at him carefully, then gasped. "Ethan? Ethan Cole?" He blinked in disbelief. "Mrs. Ramirez?" Her face broke into a smile. "You remember me. You used to help me with my groceries, Mijo. Look at you now. I see you on the news." He laughed, standing to hug her. She smelled faintly of soap and cinnamon, just as he remembered. "What happened to Rick?" he asked when they sat down on the step outside. Her smile dimmed. "He passed away last year. Heart trouble. He talked about you, though. Always said you were going places." Ethan stared at the cracked sidewalk, his throat tightening. "I should have come back sooner." Mrs. Ramirez placed a gentle hand on his arm. "He wouldn't want you to feel guilty. He'd be proud. You made it out. That's what he wanted for you." They sat in silence for a while, the city humming around them. When he finally stood to leave, she pressed something into his hand. A folded piece of paper, yellowed with age. "Rick left this with me, said if you ever came back, I should give it to you." Ethan unfolded it carefully. Inside, written in Rick's rough handwriting, were the words, "Never let success make you forget the people who still stand behind the counter." He swallowed hard, folded the note again, and slipped it into his jacket pocket. "Thank you," he whispered. That night he couldn't sleep. Rick's note burned in his chest like a brand. By morning, he knew what he had to do. At the Cole Foundation, he called an emergency meeting. The board members, philanthropists, and investors all gathered, whispering to one another. Ethan stood before them, eyes clear, voice steady. "We're expanding the foundation's mission," he announced. "Not just funding startups. We're creating a nationwide program to support workers, the ones who've been left behind. We'll call it the Counter Project." A few board members frowned. "That's charity," one said, his tone sharp. "It doesn't generate returns." Ethan smiled faintly. "It generates dignity, and that's a return I'm willing to invest in." The room went silent. Over the next months, the Counter Project took shape. Scholarships for service workers, healthcare assistance, training programs, microloans for small food businesses. The press loved it. But for Ethan, it was more than PR. It was penance. Every ribbon-cutting ceremony, every handshake, every smile from a diner owner reminded him that he was still tethered to something real. And that was when he saw her again. At one of the project's events, a small burger shop reopening in Queens, a young woman approached him. She wore a plain black blazer, her hair pulled into a neat ponytail. Her badge read Project Coordinator Cole Foundation. She extended her hand with a composed smile. "Mr. Cole, it's an honor to meet you. I'm Emma." He shook her hand, nodding politely. "Pleasure's mine, Emma. I've heard your name. You've done great work with the training initiative." Her eyes flickered, amused. "Thank you. I learned from the best." Something about her voice, calm, deliberate, warm, caught him off guard. They spoke briefly that afternoon, then again a week later at another event. Soon, their conversations became longer, deeper. She asked questions no one else did, not about profits but about purpose. About who he was before all of this. She reminded him of something he'd lost, the ability to speak honestly, without calculation. Weeks turned into months, and Ethan found himself drawn to her presence. Not out of romance, though perhaps that was beginning to bloom somewhere quiet and unspoken, but because she listened like someone who saw the man behind the myth. One evening, as they walked through Central Park after a charity gala, Emma asked softly, "Do you ever miss it? The counter?" He laughed, surprised. "Every day." "Then why not go back?" He smiled at her. "I think I already am, just in a different way." But later that night, alone in his apartment, her words echoed in his mind. Why not go back? The thought wouldn't leave him, and he knew, deep down, that the story wasn't finished. Because redemption isn't a moment. It's a cycle. And every cycle eventually leads you back to where it all began. Ethan looked out at the skyline, the lights shimmering like 1,000 unanswered prayers. He whispered into the glass reflection of his younger self. Maybe it's time. Outside, the city pulsed with life. Unaware that the man who had fed its hunger for hope was preparing to step away from his empire to rediscover the one thing even billions couldn't buy: peace. He left without telling anyone. Not the board, not Talia, not the press. One morning, before dawn, Ethan Cole walked out of his penthouse with nothing but a single suitcase and a folded note left on his desk that read, "I'm taking time to listen again." The city was still half asleep when he stepped into the misty street, the towers looming behind him like silent witnesses. No headlines followed him that day. No cameras, no security, no driver waiting at the curb. For the first time in years, he disappeared into anonymity. It was both terrifying and liberating. The train that carried him north cut through the gray veins of the Hudson Valley, its windows fogged with condensation. Ethan sat by the glass, watching towns slip by like memories. Brick factories turned to condos, diners with flickering neon, fields swallowed by winter mist. The rhythm of the train felt like a heartbeat slowing down. He had no plan, no destination beyond the vague idea of a way. He ended up in a small coastal town in Maine, the kind of place that still smelled of salt and pine. A harbor village of weathered docks and wooden houses that leaned with the wind. The innkeeper didn't recognize him when he paid cash for a room overlooking the sea. "You here for the fishing or the quiet?" she asked. "The quiet," he said, and for months that was all he sought. Days passed like waves, soft, repetitive, cleansing. He woke early, walked along the rocky shore, sometimes helped the local fishermen unload their nets. At night, he read, cooked simple meals, listened to the sea crash against the cliffs. He'd traded boardrooms for silence, speeches for seagulls. The first few weeks were difficult. His body still moved to the rhythm of meetings and deadlines. He'd wake at dawn reaching for his phone before remembering there was no schedule waiting. Slowly, the restlessness ebbed. One afternoon, while wandering through the town square, he found a small cafe that doubled as a community kitchen. A sign on the door read, "Volunteers welcome." He pushed it open. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of coffee and freshly baked bread. Behind the counter, a young man with sleeve tattoos was arranging pastries. "You new around here?" he asked. "Just passing through," Ethan replied. "I saw the sign. You still need volunteers?" The man nodded. "Always. You cook?" "I used to," Ethan said, smiling faintly. "Mostly burgers." The man grinned. "Then you're hired." "Sort of. We don't pay much. Actually, we don't pay at all." "That's fine," Ethan said. "I'm not here for that." And just like that, the billionaire turned cook again. The cafe was called the Harbor Table. It was a non-profit kitchen that fed whoever walked in, no questions asked. Fishermen after long nights at sea, single mothers, drifters, students, everyone sat at the same tables. The town had built it together after a storm destroyed half their docks. It was survival made into kindness. Ethan worked there quietly, washing dishes, serving soup, chopping onions. He didn't talk about who he was, When people asked where he came from, he said only, "Far enough." There was a rhythm to the work he hadn't felt in years. The hiss of the stove, the scrape of knives, the laughter of volunteers. It all reminded him of something pure. Each day ended with tired hands and a full heart. But even in peace, the past has a way of finding you. It was a rainy evening when it arrived, not in the form of a memory, but a person. He was wiping down tables when the door swung open, wind and rain rushing in behind a man in a soaked trench coat. The man shook off his umbrella, glanced around, then froze. "Ethan?" Ethan looked up. For a moment he didn't recognize him. Then the face clicked into place, older, thinner, but unmistakable. Brandon Hayes, the student who had once thrown money at him. The air seemed to thicken. The clatter of dishes from the kitchen faded into background hum. Brandon's expression shifted from disbelief to something else. Guilt, maybe, or shame. "I didn't expect," Brandon started, his voice unsure. "I didn't even know you were alive up here. They said you'd vanished." "I did?" Ethan said simply, drying his hands on a towel. "What brings you here?" Brandon hesitated. I saw your foundation's name on the donor list outside. Cole Foundation, Community Grant. I've been working with a local outreach startup trying to get funding. I didn't realize you were behind it." Ethan said nothing. Brandon stepped closer. "Listen, I know what happened years ago was awful. I was stupid, arrogant. I've thought about it more times than I can count. When you walked out that day, I thought you destroyed me. But you didn't. You made me realize who I'd become." Ethan leaned against the counter, studying him quietly. "And who are you now?" Brandon swallowed. "Someone trying to make things right." The rain drummed harder against the windows. For a long while neither spoke. Finally Ethan motioned to a seat. "Sit down." They sat at one of the wooden tables by the window. Outside, the ocean churned, gray and endless. Brandon took a breath. "I know I can't undo what I did, but I wanted you to know that it changed me. After that day, I dropped out of the investment track. I started working with small towns, helping them build sustainable food programs. That's what brought me here. The harbor table was one of our first partners." Ethan's eyes softened slightly. "You helped build this place?" "In a way, yeah," Brandon said. "But they kept it running after we left. I came back to see how it was doing." Ethan looked around. The tables, the smell of bread, the laughter from the kitchen, and smiled faintly. "It's doing fine." Brandon hesitated, then said quietly, "I didn't expect to see you here, not after everything. I thought you'd hate me." Ethan shook his head. "Hate's heavy. I've carried enough weight in my life." Brandon's eyes glistened. "I'm sorry, Ethan. Truly." "I know," Ethan said softly. "And you're not the same boy anymore. Neither am I." They sat in silence, listening to the rain. For the first time, the past didn't feel like a wound. It felt like a scar, healed, but never forgotten. Later that night, after the cafe closed, Ethan stood by the window watching the storm ease. The moon peeked through the thinning clouds, silver light rippling across the wet streets. He thought about Brandon, about Rick, about Mrs. Ramirez, about all the people who had shaped his life in small, quiet ways. He realized that maybe his disappearance hadn't been an escape. Maybe it had been preparation to understand what came next. The next morning, he woke before dawn and walked to the docks. The fishermen were already there, silhouettes against the pale horizon. One of them waved. "You coming out today, Mr. Cook?" Ethan grinned. "Yeah, why not?" The sea was calm, the air crisp. As the boat drifted beyond the harbor, he felt the hum of the engine beneath his feet and the salt spray on his face. It was the first time in years he'd felt completely unbound. No titles, no cameras, no expectations. Just a man breathing. He didn't know how long he stayed in that town. Days blurred into weeks, weeks into months. The world went on without him, or perhaps, for the first time, it went on with him, quietly, gently, at the same pace. One evening, as he walked along the beach, he found Emma there, standing barefoot on the sand, her shoes dangling from her hand. She turned when she heard him. "I knew I'd find you eventually," she said with a small smile. Ethan's heart skipped. How did you? Talia, she interrupted, laughing. You didn't think you could just vanish forever, did you? The foundation's been trying to reach you for months. They need your approval for the next funding round. He chuckled. I guess I'm still needed, then. Emma stepped closer, her hair whipping in the wind. They need you, yes, but not the way you think. The world needs people who remember what matters. You can't stay hidden forever, Ethan. He looked out at the horizon. The line where sea met sky, endless and fragile. I don't know if I can go back. Then don't go back, she said softly. Go forward. Just don't stop. Her words sank deep. They stood there as the sun set, its reflection rippling on the waves like molten gold. Later, when they walked back toward town, Ethan knew what he had to do. He wouldn't return as the man he once was, the CEO, the billionaire, the symbol. He'd return as the man he was now, grounded, flawed, human. The foundation would go on, but differently this time. No more speeches about impact metrics or scalable empathy. Just real change, quiet and slow. He wrote a letter that night, by candlelight. To those who believed in me, I'm coming home. But not to the skyscrapers or the stages. Home is wherever work and heart meet again. I'll see you soon. When he sealed it, he felt a calm unlike anything he'd known. He stepped outside, the stars stretching endless above him, and whispered, Thank you, Rick. The next morning, Ethan Cole boarded a train back to New York. The city rose on the horizon like a memory he was finally ready to face, not as a conqueror, but as a man who had learned to kneel. He closed his eyes as the train rumbled on, the sound of wheels against steel blending with the rhythm of the ocean still echoing in his chest. He was going home, not to reclaim his place, but to redefine it. And somewhere deep inside, a quiet truth bloomed. Success wasn't about being remembered. It was about remembering what truly mattered. The city lights grew closer. Ethan smiled faintly. The story wasn't ending. It was only folding into something new, something gentler, something real. The train slid into Penn Station just as dawn broke across the skyline. Pale sunlight spilled through the steel ribs of the terminal, slicing across the crowd like silent music. Ethan Cole stepped off the platform with his single suitcase, the same one he'd carried months ago when he disappeared. The noise of New York rose around him. Impatient horns, distant sirens, the rumble of a city that never forgot how to wake up. Yet to him it all sounded different now, gentler somehow, as if he was listening to it from inside a memory. He walked through the terminal slowly, past the commuters rushing toward their lives, past coffee stands and newspaper racks shouting headlines about markets and elections. No one recognized him, and he preferred it that way. He'd been a name on screens for too long. Fame had turned his face into something other people owned. Now, moving through the crowd unseen, he felt human again. Outside, the air was crisp, tinged with exhaust and roasted chestnuts from a street cart. The city's heartbeat thudded beneath his feet, a pulse of footsteps, voices, wheels. For a moment, he simply stood there on the curb, watching taxis glide past in streaks of yellow. It was the same city he'd left, and yet not. Maybe it was he who'd changed. He made his way uptown, walking instead of calling a car. The buildings grew taller, the air colder. When he finally reached the Cole Ventures headquarters, a tower of glass and steel that mirrored the clouds, he stopped across the street and looked up. The company name still gleamed in brushed metal above the entrance, but seeing it now felt strange, as if it belonged to another man. Inside the lobby, people moved briskly, carrying coffee and tablets, badges swinging from lanyards. The receptionist looked up when he entered, her eyes widening for a moment before she composed herself. Mr. Cole, we weren't expecting you. I wasn't expecting me either, Ethan said with a faint smile. Is Talia in? Conference room 12B. Board meeting. Of course. He could almost predict the agenda. Quarterly performance, projections, and perhaps a polite mention of his absence. He thanked her and took the elevator up. As the doors closed, his reflection shimmered in the mirrored surface. No longer the sharp, polished CEO of the old photos, but something quieter. There were lines at the corners of his eyes now, and a hint of gray at his temples. But there was peace too, the kind that doesn't come from winning, but from surviving yourself. When the elevator opened, the familiar corridor stretched before him, lined with framed photos of milestones. QuickBite's first delivery truck, the team's first office, his own face on the cover of Forbes. He passed them all without slowing, the memories flickering like old film. The boardroom door was half open. Voices drifted out, low, clipped, cautious. He pushed it open. The room fell silent. Talia was the first to turn. Her eyes widened, disbelief flashing across her face before softening into something else. Relief, maybe, or gratitude. "Ethan," she breathed. "You're back." For a moment no one spoke. The board members, a mosaic of suits and skepticism, shifted in their seats. One of them, a man with silver hair and a perfect tie, broke the silence. "Mr. Cole," he said carefully, "we didn't expect your return. The foundation has been operating smoothly under interim leadership." Ethan nodded, his tone even. "I know. I've been following from a distance." Talia gestured for him to take a seat. "We were just discussing the annual reports. Growth has been steady. But the foundation," she hesitated, "it's drifting. Without your direction, there's been tension about focus and funding." He sat down, folding his hands. "Tension's healthy. It means people care." The silver-haired man frowned. "With respect, Mr. Cole, what we need isn't sentiment. We need leadership." Ethan looked at him calmly. "Leadership isn't the same as control. It's knowing when to step back." A murmur ran through the room. He could see the confusion on their faces, the subtle discomfort. They wanted the old Ethan, the strategist, the visionary, the man who'd turned empathy into empire. But that man was gone. He took a deep breath. "I came back because I realized something," he began. "I built this company on the idea that success and compassion could coexist. And maybe that was true for a time. But somewhere along the way, we started measuring hearts with the same tools we use to measure profits. We started treating generosity as a brand." Talia's gaze was steady, her expression unreadable. The others shifted again, some uneasy, some intrigued. Ethan continued, his voice soft but firm. "We made impact reports, sponsorship decks, press campaigns. We turned kindness into data. And in doing so, we lost what made it real." He paused, the silence in the room stretching taut. "So here's what's going to happen. I'm stepping down permanently this time, effective today." Gasps rippled across the table. Talia's voice cracked slightly. "Ethan, you don't have to." He shook his head gently. "Yes, I do. The foundation, the company, they've grown beyond me. If I stay, I'll only cast a shadow. It's time for someone else to lead. Someone who isn't haunted by the ghosts of every dollar and decision." The silver-haired man leaned forward. "And who exactly will that be?" Ethan smiled faintly. "You already have her." He nodded toward Talia. "She's been leading this company quietly for years. You just didn't notice." Her eyes widened. "Ethan, you built the structure that kept it alive while I was gone," he said. "You reminded everyone that purpose still matters when profit blinds them. You're the future of Cole Ventures, Talia. If you want it." Tears shimmered in her eyes, but her voice was steady. "If I take it, it'll be because you showed us how to believe in something bigger than a bottom line." He smiled. "Then that's enough." He stood, leaving behind the stunned silence of the room. As he walked toward the door, the silver-haired man called out, "Mr. Cole, what will you do now?" Ethan turned, his expression peaceful. "Live." The word hung in the air like an exhale. Then he was gone. Outside, the city greeted him with noise and light. He walked through it like someone moving through a painting, colors and sounds blurring around him, alive but distant. He wandered with no destination, ending up in a part of the city he hadn't seen in years, the Lower East Side, where old tenement buildings leaned over narrow streets. He stopped at a small food stand by the corner. The smell of grilled onions hit him like a memory. The vendor, a middle-aged man with tired eyes, smiled. "Burger?" Ethan hesitated, then nodded. Yeah. Burger. The man wrapped it in paper and handed it over. Ethan took a bite, the grease and salt and warmth flooding him with a strange, aching nostalgia. He stood there, chewing slowly, watching people pass, delivery drivers, teenagers, parents with strollers. Ordinary lives, unphotographed, unmeasured. The kind of lives his empire had once claimed to help, and now finally did. When he finished, he dropped the wrapper in the trash and looked up at the sky. The sun was setting, staining the clouds with gold and rose. The city glowed beneath it, vast and imperfect, full of noise and hope. He walked until the streets grew quiet and the lights dimmed. Eventually, he found himself in front of a small community kitchen with a sign that read the Counter Project, a Cole Foundation initiative. Through the glass, he saw volunteers moving behind the counter, young people serving food, laughing, cleaning. One of them looked up and saw him. It was Emma. She broke into a smile and ran to open the door. "You came back. I told you I would," he said. She stepped aside. "We kept your seat." He walked in. The smell of soup and bread filled the room. People sat shoulder to shoulder. Rich, poor, tired, joyful. No barriers, no titles. Just humanity, warm and alive. Ethan rolled up his sleeves, took a ladle and joined the line. The rhythm came back to him easily: scoop, serve, smile. Each face that looked up carried a story, and each story reminded him why he'd started in the first place. Hours passed like minutes. When the last meal was served, Emma handed him a mug of coffee and said quietly, "You built something that lasts." He shook his head. "No, we all did." They sat together by the window, watching the streetlights flicker on one by one. Outside, snow began to fall, soft and silent, blanketing the city in light. Ethan looked out at it and felt the peace he'd chased for years finally settle inside him. It wasn't the peace of endings or achievements. It was the peace of acceptance, of knowing he'd given everything he could, and that it had mattered. He thought of Rick, of Mrs. Ramirez, of Brandon, of the boy he used to be behind the counter, dreaming of more. Somewhere he hoped they were proud. Emma leaned her head against his shoulder. "What now?" she asked softly. He smiled, eyes fixed on the falling snow. "Now we keep feeding people." They sat there until the night folded around them, the quiet hum of the kitchen fading into the rhythm of their breathing. Outside, the city shimmered beneath the snow. Imperfect, endless, alive. And for the first time, Ethan Cole no longer felt the need to change it. He simply belonged to it. And in that belonging, the story finally came full circle. Not in triumph, but in tenderness. Not with a headline, but with a heartbeat. The boy behind the counter had found his way home.